Good evening. I'm Nicole. I'm the pastor here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time to worship with us and spend your time with us tonight. Refuge is a safe place for all people to explore their faith in Jesus and restore their faith in his people. Like I said, my name is Nicole, and I am a recovering middle child. Could we turn my microphone down just like a smidgen? We have a new sound guy tonight, and he's doing fantastic. Thank you, Raul, for stepping up. So I am a recovering... What was that noise? Was that? Okay. I'm a recovering middle child. Any middle children? Any seconds here? Seconds? Look, in psychology, there is this idea that's called birth order. Anybody heard of that? It's not labeling. It's not predestination. It just kind of is an observation of children in a certain order and how they land in that order and how they learn to show up and exist in the world. You know, because for me and my younger brother, when we arrived in this world, there was already a system in place. But being the oldest, being the middle, being the youngest, that doesn't decide who you become, but it does kind of influence what you had to learn early on, what you carried, and pretty much how you survived in your home. I'm just going to apologize up front that this might be a little bit longer than you're used to. I wrote it this morning. I worked 4 days this week, and it was overbooked and understaffed. And then Friday, just yesterday wasn't a super duper day. My wife's not pregnant, so you get in your 30s and all of a sudden you get a negative pregnancy test is a big bummer. But so I was like, I'm not writing a sermon today. That was when I was going to write my sermon. I was like, I'm not writing a sermon today. So I deep cleaned my house and kept myself busy. And so I wrote this morning, and so it's got a lot of words in it. And so I'm sorry. So buckle up. So I am the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother. And did I put the picture of us in there? No. There's a picture of us that really just helps explain who we are. We're sitting on a giant chair outside of Nervous Nellie's. My sister, who's the oldest, is sitting there. My brother is being defiant and not smiling, and then I am leaning back in the chair with my feet in the air. And I don't think that describes birth order absolutely perfectly, better than I could. But I'm going to give it a shot. So, any oldest children? Any firstborns? All right. Calm down. They are typically responsible rule followers. They feel pressure to get it right. They take leadership roles or caretaker roles. They're very sensitive to approval and expectations, sometimes very type A, because they were the only kid for a while. The adults around them set the rules, and they learned how to follow those rules to please the adults around them. My sister, one time, we were in the back of the van, and she asked me a question, and I was like, yeah. And we were like still single-digit ages. And she goes, yes, ma'am. And I was like, yes, ma'am. And then my mom goes, she doesn't have to say yes, ma'am to you, Leslie. Hush up. So the middle child, number twos. I didn't want to say that. But we're flexible. We're more adaptable, empathetic, more observant. We can feel overlooked or in between. But middle children can often have a strong sense of fairness and justice because they grow up having to navigate an older sibling and a younger sibling and figuring out how to live in between that. Especially in my house, my sister, firstborn to the T, especially like type A. She graduated high school with an unweighted GPA of like 6, like super smart. You laugh now. We went to the same high school. I had a lot of the same teachers. None of them liked me. One even accused me of cheating, not teaching, because why would I do that? Because my sister was so smart, and I'm kind of smart, and I got 100 on my Spanish test, and the teacher accused me of cheating. I was like, what proof do you have? But needless to say, my sister set the bar way too high, and then in comes the middle child. We often grow up to become helpers, advocates, counselors, or leaders who elevate others. And then the youngest, they can be playful or expressive, comfortable being seen, but they're also a boundary pusher. They can teeter between being over-dependent, but also fiercely independent at the same time. They feel protected and underestimated all at the same time because they came into a system that was already built, but the rules become a little bit looser for them babies, which is so annoying. They often are the ones who can lighten up a room. They are charming. They've learned how to connect with people through their personality. And I don't think that there's really a better definition or description of a misfit than a middle child. Not because we're not loved. We feel like we're a misfit early on, not because something's wrong with us, but because we've learned how to navigate the world a little bit differently in the in-between of having older siblings and younger siblings. I didn't grow up a misfit because I was rejected or unloved, but because I learned how to find my belonging on my own terms. I blazed my own trail, marched to a beat of my own drum. I did things my way. I did a lot of pushing back on societal norms. And I was never really trying to purposely shock people. I just knew I didn't fit the mold that was being handed to me. I was a tomboy. Clearly, I climbed and fell out of trees. I caught frogs and lizards. And when I had my own agency and my own money, my wardrobe mostly came from thrift stores. T-shirts, ripped up jeans from thrift stores. I didn't care about looking like everybody else. I just cared about being comfortable in my own skin. And the older I got, it looked like tattoos, piercings, flannels, and then ultimately falling madly in love with a girl and marrying her before she realized how weird I really am. And despite my toxic trait of always wanting to be the center of attention, it was never really about me trying to stand out. I just knew I didn't want to pretend to be someone that I was not. And I often make the joke that the closet was glass. But I think in reflecting on it and writing this sermon and thinking through this is that I think I made my closet glass because I wanted to be as much of myself as I could before I really had the courage to come out and be fully myself. And so I checked all the lesbian boxes except the being out part. But then finally I was one day, screw it, I'm just going to be me. And being a middle child misfit is probably what prepared me to love the kind of church Jesus was trying to build and to love the people that we are trying to build it with. To see how Jesus didn't just love the misfits, but he kept searching for them. He kept running towards one more misfit after one more misfit. Story after story in Scripture, we see Jesus was drawn to people that didn't fit neatly into the categories that they had set at the time. People who lived between two different worlds. People who carried a lot quietly. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't come up with our brand of misfits. This language came from our founding pastor, Brian Culbertson. And Refuge was a church that was built on the foundation that the Church of Jesus would be a place where broken people didn't have to pretend they were whole. A place where belonging came first, that grace is abundant, and misfits aren't being fixed, but they're being welcomed. When I found Refuge as a middle child, gay Christian, and a person treading water in the sea of deconstruction and reconstruction, the word misfit fit. And in January of 2022, I was one more misfit that Refuge existed for. So this misfit, this moniker, it's followed us. It's a legacy that Brian passed on. And it's not for nostalgia. It's not to just keep something around or to keep the branding. In my humble opinion, Misfits, community of misfits, is a church that Jesus built. Misfits are the people that Jesus called and continues to chase after. So that brings us to the close of our series tonight, the close of our One More series tonight, that I'm calling One More Misfit. In week one, we looked at 2 of 3 parables that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15, the lost sheep and the lost coin. And tonight I want to go back and read the last parable, the parable of the lost son, or as a lot of us might know it, the prodigal son. So we're going to be in Luke 15, verse 11. To illustrate the point further, so this is coming after he tells the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the woman turning up her house to find the coin. It says, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, like those middle children, those second-born, they're just misfits. He said, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. And a few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money on wild living. Now, this is shocking even to us as modern day readers, but what made this even more devastating is what is implied by the prodigal misfit son when he says, I want my share now. What he's saying to his father is, he said, I'm tired of waiting for you to die. I don't want to wait on that anymore. I don't want a relationship with you. I just want what you have to give me. It's more than just a privileged rebellion. This son is putting to death his relationship with his father. He's not saying, I need space, I need to go out on my own, I need to figure it myself out. What he's telling his father is, Dad, I want your stuff. I don't want you. And somehow hearing this, the father agrees without argument or a lecture or a gentle warning to not spend all your money in one place. He just lets him go. And even in this act, the father is showing us what true unconditional love really is for his child, because love does not coerce, does not guilt. Real love doesn't chain people to a table or a place. Real love always allows there to be a choice, even if that choice is heartbreaking. And this son is acting in a misguided, misfit way. He wants freedom. He wants life on his own terms with no expectations, no one telling him what he's supposed to be or how he should behave. And when Jesus says a distant country, it's not just geographical, but it's relationally, it's emotionally and spiritually. He's distant from his family and everything he knows. But this kind of distance, as we learn in the next verses, came with a cost and resulted in a lot of loss. Verse 14 said, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I'm dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both you and heaven, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a servant. So the money runs out, the parties stop, the friends disappear. And then because when it rains, it pours, am I right? There's a famine. He's got no money, he's got no people, and now he's got no food. Nobody's got food. The famine didn't come while he was flush with cash and throwing out dollar bills. It came when he had nothing left. And we can survive on our own momentum until we can't anymore. So out of desperation, he takes a job at a farm feeding pigs. Now, to us folks who pay money to go swimming with pigs, we're like, oh, big deal, whatever. Or you vacation to a dairy farm and feed their pigs. We're like, oh, that sounds like a good time. I mean, not to me. I went to the Bahamas and they're like, you can swim with pigs. And I was like, no, I can't. Not for me. But this made Jesus's audience uncomfortable as it makes us to think about swimming with pigs. Because Jesus now has mentioned that God is like a shepherd who finds a lost sheep, and God is like a woman. And now we're listening to a story about feeding pigs. Jesus' listeners, it wasn't just a bad and undesired job. Feeding pigs was social, religious, and personal humiliation. because, like just about everything in the Bible, pigs were unclean. And Jesus takes it one more step further, because what we've learned about Jesus is he's a line crosser. Can I get an amen? Is this lost son wasn't just feeding the pigs, but he was so hungry and so desperate that he was wishing he could eat the pig's food. And if you're paying attention to what's happening in these verses, the real gut punch comes with the line is that no one gave him anything, telling us that this farmer didn't even offer him the pig slop to eat. And this can be an unintended consequence of desiring freedom or living life on our own terms. And it's isolation, with sometimes through no fault of our own. Sometimes we isolate ourselves on purpose. My father, when we moved to Florida, he was a Church of God pastor. And like my mom and dad, they were like well known in Church of God circles. Like if my mom walked into a room, they'd be like, give Vicky a mic, she's singing, she's doing something. And when my parents got divorced, it was obviously my mom's fault. Not the drinking, not the strip clubs, not the affairs, not the phone sex calls, none of that. None of the stuff that my dad did to prompt my mom to get a divorce, but it was somehow my mom's fault. And all of those connections, all of those people that thought would be on her side forced her into isolation. So sometimes it's brought on without being our own fault. And this son thought this distance, this isolation would give him freedom and independence, but now he's completely alone and not even being offered pig food to eat. And finally, like all good middle children, he comes to his senses. He did it on his own terms, but he got there. He starts to think about home, think about his dad. Think about the servants who had plenty of food that was not intended for pigs. So he starts to rehearse his speech, and he plans to go and talk to his dad and make a deal with his dad. And I don't know if this is unique to middle children, but this is for sure a Nicole move to like rehearse a speech, like to go over. I don't know. Maybe it's an ADHD thing. I don't know. But I always rehearse what I'm going to say. Any confrontation, like I go through it in my head over and over again. Like when I came out to my sister, I like had this speech prepared and I was like, okay, I'm going to tell her. And I've told this story before. I go in and I tell Les, I said, I'm gay. And she goes, okay, can we go to bed now? It's like 1:00 in the morning. And I was like, I had a whole speech prepared. She's like, do you want to give it? It's not really. Okay, then let's go to bed. But he's preparing this speech. He's preparing this argument and this plea. Father, I have sinned, which is true. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, also true. His defiant actions and rebellion gave his father plenty of reason in this time to disown him, to cut him off from his family. This was a punishment that would fit the crime. And he says, maybe I can earn my way back. Maybe I can live and work with the servants and pay off my debt. He doesn't come home seeking restoration because he's believing he's undeserving of that grace and that forgiveness. All that he wants in this moment is to survive. He doesn't want a hug. He doesn't want a handout. He just doesn't want to starve. So he's turning towards home without really fully understanding how good his father really is. So he gets up dirty, hungry, and ashamed, and he starts to walk home. And in verse 20 it said, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Now, this is something that we often overlook when we read it in English. But what Jesus tells his audience is while he was still a long way off. This isn't a dad who went out with his cup of coffee and his his book and to sit on his rocker and to read his book in the morning, and looks up and all of a sudden sees his son. This was a man who was actively searching and looking for his son to return home. This was a father who got up every day on his roof or his balcony, and he scanned the horizon looking for his son to be walking towards his house every day with hope, every day waiting. And finally, one day, he goes up to the roof to start looking, and he sees his son. And with compassion, he's filled with compassion, he begins to run towards his son. And again, another little detail that we gloss over, because it's 2026. Like, some of us even have New Year's resolutions. We're going to run more. Running isn't weird. But Middle Eastern patriarchs, like this man would have been, did not run. Dignified men with prestige and honor and money, they did not hike up their robes and sprint through the village. Now, I don't know how you've pictured this story, if you've heard it in the past, but for me, it was always like a big farmhouse on like acres and acres of land that was isolated and secluded, like normal people. But it wasn't, because ancient Jews of this time, community was their lifeblood. So this was probably a big house, because he's rich, in the middle of a village and a neighborhood and a community. So when he sees his son, he hikes up that robe, shows off his knees, and runs past Pharisees, priests, and other wealthy men, sprinting towards his son, because in that moment he chose connection and unconditional love over his own dignity. And what this means is the son doesn't even make it all the way home before grace meets him. He doesn't get far enough to prove anything. He doesn't get cleaned up enough to be presentable. He doesn't even get to finish his speech, because grace moved first. And his father meets him with a desperate and emotional embrace. And this is a moment that all misfits are looking for one way or another. Often trying to return home, and we're expecting rejection, but then being offered affection. That's what we desire. And so this is where the story stops being about the son's failures, and it becomes about the father's heart and the father's unconditional love for his children. And what Jesus is saying is that God is like a man who does not wait with their arms crossed, does not demand an explanation or an apology before he offers compassion. God just runs towards misfits, towards the broken. God runs towards those who thought they'd find their freedom in distance and have been running the opposite direction for however long. And before the son can even finish his rehearsed speech that he was repeating over and over to himself on that walk home. I mean, he was in a distant country, so he had a good day and a half walk. I don't know if that's true. This is a made-up story by Jesus, so I can't give you those details. But that's how I picture it. He's just walking. Father, I have sinned. I'm no longer, just over and over and over. Before he can even finish his speech, the father already decided, you're home. Grace, his father's grace, cuts him off mid-grovel. And in verse 22, we see the father said to his servants, quick, bring the finest robes in the house and put them on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandal for his feet. Kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and now has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. And before he can even ask to be demoted, be asked to be given the life of a servant, the father says, quick. It's immediate. There's no, well, okay, let's see how this goes. You've been gone for a long time. You got to re-enter the work and learn how to do it all over again. This wasn't like we'll work towards a restoration. This was quick. giving him the best robe, which meant his father was replacing all of his shame with honor. They got the ring, which meant his identity was being restored. He was being brought back into the family without any requirements. And sandals, again, this is something that a big part that we miss. Because like sandals, everybody needs shoes. But servants went barefoot. The position that he was asking for, the servants went barefoot, but the sons did not. The son came home looking for a way to survive, just looking for a place to sleep and food to eat, but the father restores him to sonship. And they throw a party. They throw a big party. And the father says, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but now is found. He's not improved. It's not he's changed his behavior. It's not he's changed his ways. It's simply that he is alive. Verse 28, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. Older children, this is not a good look for you. Just kidding. Well, not really, but you'll see. He's working in the fields, and when he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and so he asked one of the servants, what's going on? The servant told him, your brother is back, and your father has killed the fattened calf, and we are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and would not go inside. His father came out and begged him and said, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never even gave me one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes. You celebrate him by killing the fatted calf. And I think it's possible to be both types of lost. Both sons are misfits, just with different stories. The older son is exactly where he's always been, working in his father's fields, doing what his father has asked him to do. He didn't run away. He didn't squander his inheritance. He didn't embarrass the family. He stayed, and he did what was expected. When he finds out why there's music and dancing and celebrating, he gets real mad. Just like the younger brother left the house, the older son now stands outside and refuses to go in, refusing to take one more step towards his brother. Physically close, but continues to be emotionally distant. One of the things that I love about this community of misfits is that we all have different stories. We all have different backgrounds. Some of us share similar experiences, but we've all learned how to survive them and believe them and restore our relationship with Jesus in our own way. I grew up in a Pentecostal Church of God. People ran around the sanctuary. People spoke in tongues. Church was loud, weird, and intense. Anybody else? Loud, weird, intense? We weren't the snake people, though. We knew better. We did not play with snakes. One of my gay mas is Jewish. She even lit the menorah here on Christmas Eve. Some grew up Catholic, evangelical. Some didn't grow up in church at all. Which means we've approached communion differently. I've said this before, but for a long time, I didn't have the affection or desire to do communion that other misfits in the room have. I'll be honest with you. I'll just be honest with you now, is that my affinity for true crime made it feel a little, well, cult adjacent. You're all thinking it. I said it. Because, I couldn't watch Harry Potter because the devil was going to climb out of the TV and get me and take my soul straight to hell. But you want me to believe that this bread and this juice and believe it is the body of Christ and to believe in transubstantiation, which means it looks like bread and juice, but it's actually the body and the blood of Jesus. But that doesn't sound mystical or sorcery to you? Whatever. I digress. One beef that I take with communion, or that I took with communion, is that, and this formed while I was working on my theology degree, is how much communion was used to gatekeep. I talked about this with Nicole a couple weeks ago. Some traditions say you can only take communion if you've confessed in the proper way. Others say you can only take it if you've been saved. Others say that only certain people belong at the table, belong to partake. But through other misfits, I've seen the beauty of this practice, probably for the first time. Because what Jesus did on the cross was not just about forgiving sins, but it was also about removing every boundary that humanity built to keep people out. That is why the veil was torn and the table kept expanding.